Welcome, Pokemon players, to a special episode of Discount Pokemon Decks. Today is going to be less game and more talking, so we're going to call this a vlog. And basically, I just had some thoughts I want to get out there and talk about how the Sun and Moon expansion has changed the game. And usually, adding a set isn't a huge big deal. Okay, sets get added every few months. They usually don't change that game that much. What changes the game is when we lose sets. So when a standard changes. So for instance, recently we lost a standard, and some of the big cards that we lost from there would be Trevenant, this version of Trevenant, which doesn't allow your opponent to play any item cards from his hand. Seismitoad, again, Quaking Punch. If you were around during this era, you definitely know these two cards. Again, you would attack with Quaking Punch, and your opponent couldn't play any items in their hand. So these were two kind of big cards that, when the meta changed and no longer supported them, the game changed. And what I mean, in case you're not sure what the meta means, the meta is the decks that are out there that you'll typically face. Okay? So the decks that people normally play. So when the new standard came around and these cards were no longer there, item lock wasn't a thing. This was a bigger thing in the last standard, and these were very big cards, and you had to work around them. Other changes that are notable would be the loss of AZ, which is a supporter, allowed you to put one of your Pokemon in your hand. It was very difficult sometimes if you couldn't one-shot somebody's Pokemon, but you got some damage and you thought you'd knock him out in the next turn. They would play AZ. Card goes away, all your damage goes for naught, and they'd start attacking you with the next guy. Cassius is another one, where you could take Pokemon basically out of the field of play. This was also mainly used for guys like Shaman and Hoopa and other kind of cards like that. But it was also used if your Pokemon was getting attacked, you could use it that way. These were also good in the stall decks in the previous standard. But in any case, so usually when a new set comes in, it's not that big. There's no one huge thing that changes everything and destroys what's there. If you had a deck that was good and a new set came out, your deck was likely to still be good. The meta would change, so if you relied on things like weaknesses or your deck was weak against something that was new, then you had some problems. Your deck may not be as strong, but that's how it goes. Your deck is only... I had someone ask me today, hey, is that Passimian Mew deck you made, is that good to play in a tournament? And my answer is it's a strong deck. Sure, it's good to play in a tournament, but it always comes up to matchups, right? You could play that deck, and as long as you have the right matchups, you're going to win. And you know what? If you get a matchup that doesn't fit that deck, you're going to lose, and that's just how it is. So there's no guarantee to anything. But normally a new set comes out, the old decks, the old combos still work for the most part. They're still strong. May go from a tier 1 to a tier 2 because of the matchups you face, but hey, those decks, those combinations still work. But this Sun and Moon expansions introduced a new style of card to the game, which has changed the whole game. And obviously you're aware by now I'm talking about GX cards. And it's not the GX cards that have changed the game so much. They look like EX cards. If they called these cards EX cards and just used this GX attack, everything would be fine. But the problem aren't these cards particularly, these GX cards. It's the anti-EX cards that now have lost a lot of their value. And I'm talking about cards like Carbink, where you'd have Safeguard, where EX couldn't attack them. Regice, again, Resistance Blizzard. If you use this attack, EX opponents couldn't damage this card. And Yveltal with Pitch Black Spear doing extra damage to EX cards. There's a couple of more, but these were kind of three of the bigger ones. And if you do budget decks, you're most likely to have these cards instead of these big guys here, right? So it really ruined it. It really hurt a lot of decks that, you know what, I could put a Regice in there and it would be kind of a defensive card. So I have a Regice Huntail deck, and half of that is Regice's Resistance Blizzard could really thwart my opponent if he had an EX heavy deck. And, stuff like that. I would call these like defensive cards. Certainly Carbink and Regice are more defensive cards. They would force people with EX decks, these expensive decks, to put cards in their decks to thwart them. So you'd have to put a Garbodor or Hexmaniac or Pokemon Ranger, Energy Denial, something so that you would be able to get rid of these cards. Otherwise, it's basically an auto loss. And so that made these cards really good for budget decks. Regice is a Ice Beam attacks. It's okay. Paralyze your opponent, do 30 damage, 50-50 chance. Carbink with the break, the ability to dish energy from your discard. That's a good thing. But of course, the more things you can have on a card, more abilities and attacks and different ways you can use it, the stronger the card is. So the problem now is that, there are people that play, let's just say there are some people that play expensive decks. And instead of playing EX decks, they're going to shift to GX decks. So what happens is the meta has changed. So these cards are still valuable against EX decks, but you're facing less EX decks, which is a problem. That means they're intrinsically, these cards are, or not intrinsically, but when it comes down to it, these cards are just less valuable. Because you're not facing, let's just say half the decks you would face would be EX decks and half wouldn't. So it was worth it to have Carbink in your deck. Sure, you'd play Serperior or Vespiquen or Raichu or whatever, and Carbink wouldn't be as valuable without this ability, but that's okay because half the games it would. A lot of times you'll put cards in your deck as a tech, and basically that means to thwart another style of deck or another card specifically. So if you know that a certain card's particular, is going to be popular, you can put a card in your deck as a tech. A good example might be Garbodor, something like that. But these cards' abilities as techs has reduced. So that means these cards are less valuable on the face. So the problem wasn't that. The problem aren't GX cards in particular. The problem is the game didn't give us any anti-GX cards. Where's the Carbink for GX? Where's the Regice for GX? They're not there. So obviously that is a problem if you're a budget deck player. And that just leaves you with one option, really. You can't play what I would call defensive decks or defensive cards. You have to play offense. So you have to play decks that just deal damage, much like the Passimian Mew, Raichu Vespiquen. You're basically going for 2-for-1 instead of trying to stall with cards like these. So that is a problem for budget deck makers, budget deck video makers. It's a problem. But, there's ways to go around it. Now, I just want to talk about some of the GX cards. The biggest one is, well, I can't see because these are all black and white. The most expensive right now is this Decide UI. I'm not sure why it's the most expensive. I mean, obviously, you can tell it has some good abilities. A single energy, you can use a DX attack to put 3 cards in your hand. This Feather Arrow doing 2 damage per turn. So, 20 damage per turn. You get 2 or 3 on your deck, on your bench doing this, and you're going to start, it's going to add up the damage, which is a pretty cool feature. But I think the more interesting card from the latest set is Lurantis. This is another expensive card. I don't think it's as expensive as Decide UI. I think actually it's about half as expensive, which is shocking to me. But, maybe the prices have shifted since then. This is a very good card, and you're seeing a lot of decks right now. The big phase with this, or big craze with this, is playing this with Vileplume. Because it finally gives you a couple of things. And this is interesting. This Flower Supply attack for 1 energy. Attach 2 basic Pokemon from your discard pile to your Pokemon in any way you like. I have tried basic Pokemon cards to team up with Vileplume. I've tried Yveltal, I've tried Volcanion, I've tried Carbink. It doesn't work as well as this does for obvious reasons. This is a green card. It has a lot more hit points, and you can easily you can easily use a Solar Blade attack, and it's got a GX attack. So this is it's a very good card. I think this is one of the stronger ones. Other notable cards that you'll see a lot, Espeon GX with this Psybeam attack to confuse your opponent, kind of slow them down a little bit for single energy. Obviously has GX and stronger attacks. Umbreon, where are you, Umbreon? right here, right next to him. Again, strafe attack. So you're seeing these a lot. Another big one, obviously, Tauros GX. I've seen this in. It just seems like people will put this in any deck where they get double colorless, because it's a much better version of the Machamp EX with the Rage attack, Horn attack, and Mad Bull. This is a hard thing to take down, and most likely, if you can't one-shot it, and with a Fighting Fury belt at 220, it's a lot harder to take down. It's gonna really start one-shotting your guys. So. Very good card. Obviously, I've been Snorlaxed or pancaked, as they call it, a couple times. There are other GX cards. Obviously, I don't want to go over all of them right now, but basically, I did something. I looked at them all, and there's 13 GX cards in the game right now. 10 of them are Stage 1 or Stage 2 Pokemon, which means only 3 are basic. So there are ways, if you want to play defensive, maybe a good idea is to grab a Glaceon. That might be idea. Claydol that devolves your opponent's Pokemon. There might be some instances there. Another thing is that to realize that 2 of the more popular ones, oops, not him, although he is, Decide UI and Lurantis are both green. So it means a little uptick in fire decks here. Maybe a little downtick to anything that's weak to green as well. Some water decks. I think Gray Ninjas, we talked about decks that are being hurt because the meta has changed. I'm sure that's one of them. This is hard to take down for a Frog, especially if it can reach the Solar Blade attack early, or even use this Chloroscythe attack. It can start one-shotting them pretty quickly. And, Gray Ninja is all about, once it's set up, it's difficult to take down. But if you could start knocking the frogs down early, it has no chance. And, so some of these cards have the ability to do that. So, the idea is you can't really, I would lessen the number of cards like this that you have, these defensive cards, and work on more, if you're going to build cheaper decks, you can look at more ones that do damage, because right now there are no defensive cards. And I try to look through I was hoping the next set might have some, and they've only published or people have only found a couple of the cards out there in the new set, which I believe is going to be called Guardians Rising. And if you think they're going to be help budget deck people, I had some hopes that maybe they'll put some good Carbink or Regice like cards in there for anti-GX. Unfortunately, it looks like they're going to help the GX cards out. So if you look at this card here, this Hala card, shuffle your cards into your hand, then draw 4 cards. If you use a GX attack this game, draw 7 cards. So it looks like they're going all in on GX. Instead of making it less likely you'll play GX cards, cards like this looks like more. So I still have hope that they'll balance it out a little bit, give the poorer Pokemon folk a chance to build some good, fun decks. Maybe give the GX people a little bit to pause about before they put those cards in the deck. Have them to put some kind of Hexmaniac or Pokemon Ranger or Garbodor or whatever it is, so that their cards, basically, decks are a lot of times it's a choice. You're trying to fill a deck up, and sometimes 60 slots aren't enough, and you need to make decisions. So if you force your opponent to put cards in there that don't really help their deck, but they're putting in to tech against you, well, that helps you out one way or another. So, but in any case, I hope when the next set comes out, Guardians Rising, hopefully we will get some anti-GX cards. Until then, I would say, go to smaller decks. Go to decks that do well against Stage 1, Stage 2 Pokemon. Maybe fire decks are back in vogue. And that's pretty much it. So thanks a lot for listening, and until next time. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you'll know when our next video is released. Also, check out our playlists, where you can find videos by topics like mill decks or cheap EX decks.